dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we're examining Biden's budget, whether the equity element of DEI is actually just communism in disguise, and the important cases that are coming up at the Supreme Court. Now remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Hot on the heels of a State of the Union address that was more campaign speech, Joe Biden has released his latest budget proposal. Now, as with all things economics, we often get in our Liberty Nation economics affairs editor, Mr. Andrew Moran, to join us and give his professional economist opinion. Andrew, welcome back to the show. Good to have you on.
Well, I wouldn't say often because I haven't been on your show in months. Many weeks.
Well, clearly nothing of economic value has happened in the last several months, right? I mean, what is it? Inflation continues to rise. Money continues to be spent. The national debt continues to go through the roof, and people continue to confuse cutting the debt with cutting the deficit. What have I missed?
Well, you should read my work on LibertyNation.com, and you'll find out all the economic trends happening.
Absolutely right. Do please check out Swamponomics on LibertyNation.com. It's Andrew's vehicle show, and it's fantastic. It's very funny, very entertaining, and basically gives you a complete roundup of everything fun in the economics world, and there is fun there. Now, Andrew, I guess we have you in here today to talk President Biden's latest budget proposal. Give me the headline numbers.
Well, the headline numbers are astonishing. So the whole overall budget is $7.3 trillion. Now, the Biden wants to spend $1 trillion more than what he did last year. But what I find the most fascinating about the budget is the cumulative effect. So you're going to have cumulatively $86 trillion in federal spending over the next 10 years. You're going to have $16 trillion in cumulative deficits over the next 10 years. And then on top of that, you're going to have $12.2 trillion worth of interest payments over 10 years. But Biden says he's going to reduce the deficit by $3 trillion over this span, which of course is just a drop in the bucket because you still have all this trillions of dollars in just red ink.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So I did some very basic accountancy at one point in my life, and I understood debits and credits. No real meaning except one goes on the left, one goes on the right, as I recall. So what's the over/under number here? What are we talking in terms of how much do we suspect this will add to the debt over its proposed period of time?
Oh, yeah. Well, so today the national debt stands at $34.5 trillion. By the 10-year period, by that window is over, it's going to be close to $53 trillion. That represents about a roughly 53% increase in this decade span.
Now, something tells me, Andrew, that you're not entirely convinced that it will only be $53 trillion. And I was also fairly skeptical about this because that assumes that everything that the government puts in place, all of these, let's quote Tom Jones here, these elusive dreams and schemes that they put in place actually work out precisely as the government plans. And that's not always the case, is it, Andrew?
Yeah, these are just rosy projections. So I wrote about this before with the Congressional Budget Office when it released its economic outlook for the next 10 years. It did not include things like a recession, a war, or perhaps a new public health crisis. So these all, whether it's the White House or a government agency, they're always on the glasses half full spectrum.
Yeah, and it also, I presume it also relies on interest rates being under control and inflation being within a measured, like up to 2%.
Yeah, I found that interesting because President Biden, he was at a campaign event recently, and he said that he knows that interest rates are going to come down soon. He just won't offer a timeline, just like the Federal Reserve will not offer a timeline. Yeah. But if you look deep within the White House budget proposal, you see that they believe that inflation is going to remain above 2% over the next 10 years, and that interest rates are going to remain above trend over the next 10 years. You see their 3-month Treasury bill; it's at above 3% over the next 10 years, and you see the benchmark 10-year, and it's also between 3 and 4% over the span. So I find that interesting because then they're assuming you have a high rate environment and still above the 2% target, above the Fed's 2% target rate.
So essentially, the White House predicts that people will continue to be paying more and more for goods for the next 10 years, assuming we stick to Joe Biden's budget plan.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, yeah.
But of
well,
course, Joe Biden's made it a center point of his State of the Union speech to say, hey, these prices, they should be coming down now. This is corporations. They're robbing you. Why aren't they coming down? And of course, the fact is, even his White House is predicting what inflation is going to continue to, because inflation's cumulative, right? It's not as though
exactly.
it's, it's well, look, inflation's down this week, therefore you're paying less. No. It means you're paying, you're still paying more, just at a slightly slower rate of increase. So this whole greedflation thing that he's putting out, it seems like a bit of a long con to me, Andrew.
Yeah, well, there's many things to unpack in your spiel there. Because one, well, the greedflation.
You can call it a rant. You go ahead.
The greedflation thing. If you look at LibertyNation.com, we debunk that myth, because one thing you look at for greedflation is you look at producer prices, the stuff that businesses pay and then pass on to consumers. That has actually exceeded the consumer price index. So if these companies were price gouging consumers, they would be paying a lot lower in the PPI. Two, I think the most egregious thing of that State of the Union address was when he claimed that the U.S. had the lowest inflation rate in the world. And of course, that is nonsense, because Japan has a lower rate, China has a lower rate, Canada has a lower rate, even the Eurozone has a lower inflation rate. So I thought that these people should be looking at the facts and preparing a huge speech that's be viewed by millions of people, and you can't get the most basic fact correct. That's astounding to me.
But something else that I wanted to delve into on the budget here, Andrew, was that it seemed to be an attempt to please everybody. It was what I'd consider an equity budget. Now, I know we all have some issues with the word equity, and rightly so, let's be fair. But, it seemed like, oh, you're going to get the same things. You're going to get this. It was like, to me, it was like Oprah Winfrey's, and you get a car, and you get a car. But it was, and you get $1 trillion, and you get $1 trillion, and you get $1 trillion. It was, Andrew, your take. This is an equity budget, isn't it? It's a let's try and create equal outcomes budget.
Well, I think it's more of an equal suffering budget, because these people. Everyone gets goodies now, but the bill eventually has to come due. Because how are you going to pay for $16 trillion worth of deficits? Oh, that's right, the printing press, monetizing the debt. Also, what I found remarkable about that budget is that he wants to end subsidies for big oil and big pharma, but he says nothing about ending subsidies for the whole green energy lobby. This was a nice giant handout for the whole renewable sector. So everyone's going to get child tax credit, everyone's going to get paid family leave, but these things cost money. And he may be paying for some of it, but then again, they're based on rosy expectations that this policy is going to raise this amount of revenue, which of course is nonsense, because let's say he raises $500 billion over 10 years from a 25% wealth tax. That's $500 billion. That's still a drop in the bucket for the $16 trillion worth of deficits.
I want to talk at length about this wealth tax, let's call it what it is, this frankly communist seizure of potentials. But we're going to talk about that when we get back after this short break. Andrew Moran, listeners out there, thank you very much. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.